There's a saying in Hollywood that you're only ever as good as your last role. Now, you can be Robert De Niro and do all the Taxi Drivers and Raging Bulls and Deer Hunters and Goodfellas as you like. The second you do Rocky and Bullwinkle, you f***ed it. Fortunately, most of your favourite actors can endure a bit of a blip, and most will go out of the way to make sure their next role restores a bit of their star power. But what happens when there is no last role? What happens when you go out on an all-time low? Well, let's find out, shall we? My name is Adam Cleary, and these are 7 great actors with terrible last roles. But before we begin, why not subscribe to stay notified? Ding, ding, done. Number 7, Sean Connery. Right up until the moment WhatCulture.com hired Andy Murray, Sean Connery was known as the greatest living Scotsman, which is a hefty accomplishment. Connery had a long and varied film career where he virtually avoided stinkers entirely. I think off the top of my head, Highlander 2: The Quickening was probably the worst role he did, but even that did nothing to dull the shaken, not stirred sparkle he'd built up before. He was just good in everything. Well, almost everything, right up until his last role as Alan Quatermain in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The dude passes up The Matrix and The Fellowship of the Ring for this, a nonsensical team-up movie that played out like Avengers Assemble being recounted in crayon by someone with a concussion. It failed spectacularly and led to Connery becoming so disillusioned with the Hollywood process that he announced his retirement from acting just a few years later. Now, yes, he did do some weird thing in 2012 with a beaver, but I'm not counting that. Number 6, Peter Cushing. Before we start, Rogue One does not count. That was not Peter Cushing, it just looked and sounded a lot like him. It's like me doing this video in this voice and saying that it's Marlon Brando's last role. Cushing was Victor Frankenstein, he was Sherlock Holmes, he was Van Helsing, and of course, Grand Moff Tarkin. He was one of the most recognizable and talented faces in all of cinema, and he went out playing Wing Commodore William Raymond in Biggles' Adventures in Time. Based on a popular young adult series that was very successful in the 60s, they brought Biggles to the big screen nearly 30 years after he was last relevant. But that's okay though, because they threw in a completely random time travel storyline for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It was shit. Number 5, Christopher Reeve. The man will always be Superman. He played the role so iconically that both Brandon Routh and Henry Cavill are still modelling their performances on him years and years later. Every time you hear that theme tune, you think of Christopher Reeve. Tragically, his acting career was cut short when a fall from a horse rendered him paralysed from the neck down. But to add more sadness onto sadness, his last role was an absolute stinker, playing Alan in the completely pointless John Carpenter Village of the Damned remake. It's an incredibly vapid rehash that does nothing but walk a load of actors through all the horror genre tropes, and is, to be completely honest, a very sad ending to what would have been an absolutely brilliant career. But it's not all bad news though. He did an excellent TV adaptation of Rear Window, so I don't know, watch that. Number 4, Peter Sellers. After a spectacular career, Peter Sellers' last role was actually, honestly, literally in Yellowface. The guy yellowed up. After everything he'd done in his career, his last ever performance, he did Yellowface. I've got nothing else. That's awful. He played Dr. Fu Manchu. He was from Hampshire. There's no words for that. Number 3, Janet Leigh. It kind of gets forgotten that she had an incredible career before it, but putting Janet Leigh in Psycho remains one of the great casting masterpieces. One of the most iconic actresses of her time, being front and center of a movie, it made her death 40 minutes in absolutely shocking. Spoilers. That said, though, her woeful last role in Halloween H2O was an almost criminal way for her to bow out. After everything she'd done for the slasher genre, her last part was in trying to reboot a franchise that had already bombed more times than a stag do in a hotel pool. Playing Norma Watson, ha ha ha, you get it, because he was called Norman in Psycho, ha ha ha. Her whole part was basically just a wink and a nod to the fact that she'd been in a more successful movie. It was totally pointless. In other words, and they could have done something interesting with her. Shame. Number 2, Heath Ledger. Although he'd only starred in a handful of films, most of them being cast as the heartthrob lead, the death of Heath Ledger at the age of only 28 really broke the world's heart. Whether he was playing some kind of social outcast or a knight or a gay cowboy, he showed real strong acting prowess. Most of us regard Ledger's real final performance as being the Joker in The Dark Knight, and yes, that will obviously be his enduring legacy, but he did get in one final performance as Tony in the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. Tragically, Ledger died halfway through filming without there being enough footage left to simply CGI him into the rest of the film, and rather than doing a complete recast, Johnny Depp, Colin Farrell and Jude Law were brought in to play representations of him. The final result was bad. Understandable, yes, but still quite bad and nowhere near the heights he would have set had he lived. Number 1, Orson Welles. You name the list, and if there is a chance I can possibly mention that Orson Welles' last role was in the animated Transformers movie, I am going to do it. Bet your mortgage on it, bet your children on it. I am on that like a pisshead on a dropped curry. So yes, Orson Welles, he of Citizen Kane fame, master performer, visionary writer, actor and director, one of the biggest names and personalities cinema has ever seen. His final performance, the one he went to his grave with, was as Unicron in the animated Transformers movie. If it's possible to have a favourite fact, I think that's mine. And what's more, it was absolutely hopeless. It was this ridiculously convoluted story, so desperately trying to add legitimacy and stakes to what was, and has always been, whisper it, a giant toy commercial. And in the middle of it all, you had Orson Welles playing this monstrous, planet-eating bad guy. Brilliant. So there you are then, a load of really good actors whose last performances were, let's face it, utter dog eggs. I'm sure you've got your own, so shout them out in the comments below. I could do 4 of these videos if I'm totally honest, but don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Until next time, my name has been Adam Cleary, desperately hoping this isn't my last role, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the video. Aren't you a star? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe below, and also there's probably more content floating up above my head, so why not check that out as well? Could be a laugh. Probably. 6 out of 10.